On the wall of a cave deep in the heart of the Sahara, someone painted swimming people. Their bodies are stretched out in the water, arms spread to the sides, legs bent in motion. This cave today lies in one of the driest places on the planet. The nearest drop of water is hundreds of kilometers of scorched sand away. Not a single stream, not a single lake, not even a puddle after rain. Only stone and dust. But the people who left this drawing saw water every day. They swam in lakes that no longer exist. They grazed herds where today not a single hoofed animal could survive. Their children played on shores now buried under several meters of sand. And when their world began to die, they did not vanish at once. They walked away. Their long journey east ended at a river that would later become the cradle of an entire civilization. To understand how the slow death of the Green Sahara changed the course of history, we need to go back about 11,000 years. That is where a story begins that is rarely told in full. Not the story of the pharaohs, not the story of the pyramids, not the story of golden masks and underground tombs. The story of people whom the desert drove out of their homes, and of how their departure prepared the ground for the world from which ancient Egypt would later grow. The real Egypt did not begin on the Nile. It began in places where today no traveler would dare to go without a water supply and satellite communication. And the strangest thing about this story is that it did not unfold over years or even centuries. It stretched over millennia, and none of its participants ever saw either its beginning or its end. At that time, the planet was emerging from the last ice age. The ice was retreating northward, and the climate was becoming warmer and wetter. The monsoon winds that today stop far to the south of the Sahara then reached thousands of kilometers deeper. They brought rains to places where now sand covers everything to the horizon. Northern Africa turned into a vast savanna, not a jungle, not a forest. Open pastures with groves of acacias, with beds of real rivers and with lakes, some of which were the size of modern seas. The largest of them, ancient Lake Megachad, exceeded the current Caspian Sea in area. From a bird's-eye view, northern Africa then resembled not a desert, but a mosaic of water and green, where blue patches stretched to the horizon and shadows of large animals wandered between them. Along the shores of these lakes lived elephants, giraffes, hippos, antelopes, crocodiles. Herds of wild bulls disappeared beyond the horizon. Lions hunted where today the temperature of the sand in summer reaches 80 degrees Celsius. And among them lived people, not rare hunters, but entire communities of herders and fishermen. They caught fish with bone harpoons, shaped some of the oldest pottery in Africa, and left behind thousands of rock paintings. On these paintings there is no desert. On them people swim, hunt, herd cattle, dance, perform some kind of rituals. Women carry children. Men lead herds. An entire living world that today seems impossible. And it is precisely this contrast between the drawing and reality that is the first clue to what happened here. The artist depicted what he saw outside his door. And outside his door was what we will never see again. The cause of the Green Sahara is not chance. The Earth's axis slightly wobbles, and the shape of its orbit slowly changes. Because of this, the amount of solar heat that the northern hemisphere receives in summer gradually shifts. About 10,000 years ago, summers in northern Africa were noticeably hotter than now. The hotter land drew in humid ocean air more strongly. The monsoon reached far to the north. Rains fell where today not a single drop falls for years. But the same movement of the axis worked in the opposite direction too. Slowly, century by century, the summer sun over Africa became slightly weaker. The difference was tiny, so tiny that it was impossible to notice within a single human life. But nature has more time than a human being. And what sounds to us like just a little bit, for a continent meant a death sentence. For people, everything looked like an ordinary drought. One lake dried up, they moved to the next. One pasture burned out, they led the herds further. This went on generation after generation. But with each century, returning became harder. Rivers that used to fill up in winter now stayed dry in spring. Grass that used to grow back after the rain now did not appear at all. Children grew up on lands where the old people still remembered lakes, while their grandchildren already saw only dust. Ancient routes used for centuries now led nowhere. In the places of former camps, bones of livestock, fragments of pottery, and cold hearths remained behind. People left and never came back. The desert did not advance like a wall. It advanced like a slow tide, from beneath which the sea no longer returned. And the most terrible thing was that no one understood that this was no longer a drought. This was the end. About 6,000 years ago, this process crossed a line beyond which there was no return. Some researchers believe that the final transition was rapid, that the climate turned the last remnants of savanna into desert within a few centuries. Others say that the collapse dragged on longer, over millennia, and that green pockets held out in mountainous regions long after the plains had already been lost. There is no single answer yet, but the outcome coincides in all hypotheses. The lakes dried up. There was no place to graze cattle. Wells that were dug deeper and deeper stopped giving water. People who for centuries had no reason to go anywhere suddenly found themselves without a future. And then began what can be called one of the quietest great migrations in the history of humankind. Without wars, without conquests, without loud names, just the slow movement of entire peoples toward what little life remained. They did not leave in crowds or all at once. One clan after another moved to where there was still water. Some went south, deeper into Africa, to the lands that today have become the Sahel. Some turned west, toward the ocean. But the most persistent stream of people moved east. There, in the middle of the advancing desert, flowed a river that nothing could stop. The Nile did not depend on local rains. It was fed by distant mountains deep in the continent, where the monsoon still kept its strength. While the Sahara was dying, the Nile continued to overflow every year, leaving behind black, fertile earth. For people who had lost their pastures, this looked like the only border between life and death. And they walked toward this border, not knowing that by arriving they were forever changing what they would find on the other side. Those who came to the Nile Valley were not empty refugees. They brought with them the experience of herding, the knowledge of pottery, the cult of the bull, ideas about the afterlife, the habit of burying the dead with special care. They brought symbols, some of which would later appear on the walls of pharaohs' tombs. Images of cows with solar discs between their horns, boats with rowers, figures of gods with animal heads. Much of what we consider purely Egyptian actually came from the depths of the dying Sahara. The narrow strip of green along the river suddenly became crowded with people from different pasts. And where too many different communities gather on a small piece of land, what archaeologists call acceleration begins. Villages appear, then cities. Common power appears. A state appears. Ancient Egypt did not grow because someone got lucky with a river. It grew because next to it an entire world was dying, and all those who survived gathered in one narrow valley. Today, if you walk deep into the Sahara, you can stumble upon shells in the sand, upon fish bones where there is no body of water, upon black spots of ancient fireplaces around which children once slept, upon stone grindstones forgotten beneath the dunes. All of this consists of traces of a world that could not be saved. The Green Sahara was not killed by a catastrophe. It was not destroyed by a meteorite, not burned by an eruption, not washed away by a wave. It was killed by a slow change that is almost impossible to notice within a single human life. And this perhaps is the most disturbing thing about its story. Entire peoples can lose their home not in a single day, but over dozens of generations, each of which is sure that there is still time ahead, that the rain will return, that the lake will fill up again, that the grass will grow back. And then one day a child is born for whom the desert is already the norm, and no one remembers what the world looked like before. The ancient Egyptians never forgot where their ancestors came from. In their myths, the desert was always the enemy, and the river was a deity. The red land of the sands opposed the black land of the flood. Light struggled with darkness, order with chaos. Perhaps they remembered what we have long forgotten. Civilizations are born not only from abundance. Sometimes they are born from the fact that somewhere nearby an entire living world is slowly disappearing. Pyramids, temples, hieroglyphs, golden masks. All of this stands on a foundation laid not by pharaohs, but by nameless herders who walked out of a dying savannah. Their names have not survived. Their faces remain only on the walls of caves, where today almost no one comes. And if so, it is worth asking ourselves, what green land is slowly disappearing next to us today, while we do not notice it? And who, thousands of years from now, will search in the sand for traces of our water?